shoulders. I'll sink into the sick, sweet land which holds all love, hold the frozen in timeless foreclosure, and I'll find somewhere in the house your first glance, tripping a chord through my nerves. If I couldn't feel your lamp burning, I don't know how I could ever rest. If I couldn't feel your lamp burning, I don't know how I could ever rest. If I couldn't rest, I wouldn't wake to find your lamp burning, and know how it is, nesting in the eaves. I come to rest.
Today's episode is about Ventifacts, the power duo between Damon and Ben. Let's dive into just how this album came about. What was the conversation that started this idea?
We'd known each other for, I don't know, 5 years or so, and we'd played at a few shows here and there together, shared the stage in our respective bands, and liked each other's work. And I had an idea of doing some kind of collaboration or proposing some kind of collaboration with Ben for, might have been a couple of years. I think by the time we had our last show together in 2018, I'd already thought of it.
Yeah, I think it was 2019, because that was the Spider Milk tour.
That's right, 2019, yeah, right before we moved. We moved from California to Vermont, right like a couple months after that, I guess then. And then it just kind of ripened. The idea ripened around, fall of 2019. After I'd moved, I kind of wanted to do something different, and thought maybe I should just ask Ben and see what he thinks. And I didn't even necessarily have the idea. I was really interested in what Ben was doing and the fact that it was microtonal songwriting, but I just remember having a pretty blank slate about what the collaboration would be. Just thinking like, let's just try to do something. And then, Ben, I didn't realize that Ben had gone so whole hog into microtonality across, like that's just what he was interested in doing. And that sounded fine to me. It was just more, it was like, okay, all right. I hadn't banked on it, but I just hadn't thought it through. And it sounded like, okay, why not? That upped the ante and made it pretty exciting and challenging.
We didn't actually mention for any uninformed listeners the names of our respective bands. Damon's band is Jack of the Clock, and mine is the Mercury Tree. And for anyone who's not aware, like Mercury Tree has been around for like quite a while, but it was only our last album, Spider Milk, where we went 100% microtonal. I'd been sort of getting into that for a few years before that. And then we had played a couple of festivals and a couple of shows together with Jack of the Clock, who I loved for all sorts of reasons. Didn't happen to be microtonal, but was so experimental and just unique in so many ways. So, but I think you're really asking Damon, so he should probably talk about what Jack of the Clock sounds like, because I'm no good at it's
No,
it's a hard thing to explain.
It's hard to. It's always impossible to characterize. I don't know what like. Yeah. Well, I mean, I came from a folk. There's a lot of folk sounds in it and instrumentation, but it also a lot of it's composed and contrapuntal. It's a mix of songwriting and chamber music with some jazz elements. I mean, it's kind of what all the different members bring to it, thrown together.
When I heard your very first solo album, I was quite surprised because it was all orchestral. Is that
The Anxiety album?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I went to, I studied as an undergrad and then in English, and then I got another degree in composition at Mills College in the sort of right before I started Jack of the Clock. But up until that point, I was kind of doing the classical composition thing. I mean, I'd been in bands in high school and whatnot, but I was, for my sort of mid-20s, I was doing the serious music only thing. And then, but I would write a song, every 2 weeks, and then I'd give it up forever, after I wrote one more song. It's like a kind of a joke, became a joke between me and Emily. So, yeah, I guess I studied composition and was for a while just trying to realize those pieces. And that's what that album, I made an album, and it was my first. I just got Pro Tools, and I loved it. I just loved the recording process, but it's so crude. I mean, just like the way I did it, it didn't, there's some basic things. I won't even admit to what I didn't know how to do at that time, but I still just loved the process of, working with, overdubbing and really rudimentary digital manipulation of tracks. And I made this album, which was a mix of chamber music and sort of, concrete type stuff, electroacoustic music called Anxiety, and it was all instrumental.
It's a really cool album. It's just very different from Jack of the Clock. So we've never really talked about exactly how you made that transition between those styles of music.
Well, I mean, for me, it wasn't a transition as much as a coming back to what I used to do. But basically, not to go into a long story about it, but I applied to a PhD program in composition at UC Berkeley and started that, and that really turned me off composition. And then it was once I got into that I started Jack of the Clock, and I realized, how much I loved doing that and kind of just doing it, the DIY as opposed to being preened to teach composition. And it's I don't want to go down a negative road, but
no, but that's interesting though, because Stephen has spent a lot of time in academia and may be able to relate to some of that. What do you think, Stephen?
I was about to say, I'm never surprised when someone says, yeah, I tried academia, and then I figured out it was academia, so now I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there were people doing interesting things.
Despite the system.
I got Jack of the Clock started, and I was like, oh, I love this, and this is what I want to put my time into. And there was a teacher there that wanted me to kind of put that into, let that be the main thing I was doing, try to do songwriting. But it put me in this weird position of he wanted me to kind of be sort of against the whole apparatus there. And there were others that didn't want me to do that sort of on the record. And so I was like, what do I need a PhD, in songwriting for? I'm just going to do this. and I was interested in psychotherapy, so I, took on approaching the second career, and like very happily dropped out and like started Jack the Clock and went whole hog into that for 10 years.
The dedication definitely shows, especially in Ventifacts. Just all of the detail in all of the little sounds and the mix and everything like that. Is there something you were doing with your voice, Ben, where sometimes you sang the melody, but it was kind of transposed down an octave, but also really soft? What is that kind of is that an effect, or?
There are definitely some vocal tracks where there is a track that's an octave down. I think Damon did a little more of that. I did that in a couple of places. That's just an octave down double track. For my voice doesn't always have a lot of low end to it. So sometimes to create a little more substance, I'll do that trick. And I think Damon sounds especially good when he did that on Dog Day Music. There's a really, really deep vocal layer, and I think that adds some gravitas.
We did it on Hurst and Harriman too. I think we did it a few places where we just literally many overdubs singing lower. Although you might be thinking of Pacific. There's a ocean. Yeah, that's an effect, right, on your end?
Yes. Gosh, what was it? On that particular part, I think that's just some distortion and maybe a modulated delay, something like that. Nothing too fancy. But a bandpass distortion. There's so many sounds you can create that way, just because there's so many places you can put the band, and it all makes it cut through it's a really great technique, because it gives a track a strong identity within the mix without overwhelming. It's very slotted in. So I think that's a great thing to do with vocals, especially vocals, because they don't, because we're so good at hearing voices. I think they can take more processing sometimes than other kinds of instruments, without just getting washed out.
How did the songwriting process work for you two? Because I know you bounced files back and forth, say Azimuth of Sunrise.
That's a great one to start with, because as we've realized, it was the first song that we finished, and also the first song on the album, and that we worked on. So initially, we had the idea that we were going to use Pro Tools composer collaboration features, because it seemed, this is perfect. It's exactly what they're designed for. And I think I had to specifically upgrade my Pro Tools, and I was really excited about this cloud feature. And it just ended up being really half-baked, which is unfortunate, because it could be amazing. Mm-hmm. But after a few frustrating experiences where the tracks weren't showing up, or even worse, just weird error messages were coming up, we sort of abandoned that and went back to the tried and true. And I think, maybe it's better to do it that way anyway, because you don't necessarily need to see every single step someone else is going through, because they may be experimenting with a lot of things. I'd rather take a few days to try all my ideas and then decide on, okay, the next mix is going to be like this. And then give you okay, here's the current version. What do you think?
Well, oftentimes Ben would send me not individual tracks in the process of going back and forth, but bundles of tracks. So I'd get the bass and all the guitars, and so we kind of get certain things would be fixed. We each had on our systems, files for each of the tracks, but we divided up fairly early. Decided, this is basically this half is going to be yours to mix, and these will be mine to mix. Even though we went back and forth a number of times throughout the process.
I think that, and it was really lucky on this project that Damon and I sort of have a lot of skills in common. We both do basically the same things for our respective bands. So we're both capable of mixing a track. And I mean, Damon's a very skillful mixer. So that meant that neither one of us had to take on the entire job of doing all the engineering in addition to writing all the songs. So it really varied from song to song, the exact process. Azimuth started with Damon sending me a bunch of hammered dulcimer parts, I think maybe 2 or 3 or 4 different sections that were just kind of long sections that were meant to be chopped up and organized into a structure, but without any vocals, without anything else. And this was actually, like, I think at least 5, 6, 7 layers of multi-tracked hammered dulcimer. So it was very, very thick and like very exciting to open up this session and, you know, pan them all in different places, and just very, very, very striking texture. So, I mean, there were so many notes in there that it was very easy to start hearing things. Just like whatever note jumped out at me, that would start to be the beginning of a melody. And so he had also sent me, I think, some number of lyrics. I don't remember how many at the beginning, but I think there were at least 3 or 4. So at that time, we didn't know that those particular hammer dulcimer parts were going to be for Azimuth. But I think those were the lyrics that sort of spoke to me initially. And so I just started, you know, singing some of those parts to the hammer dulcimer and just getting an idea. And then I added a guitar part. So I don't know how much I did on the first draft, but I came up with a few sections and I sort of organized them and I sang over them. And I think I had the first guitar part that you hear in the intro of the song. So that was what I sent to Damon. And I think at that point, we realized we had a song in the making. And so we just sort of continued the same process from there on that particular song.
Yeah, I'd sent the first wave was actually, I mean, it makes sense that Azimuth took off, but the one I worked on a lot initially was Pacific, the coming up with that melody, the opening melody. And Azimuth, like the day I recorded Pacific, it was like very, and it wasn't the whole thing. It was just, you know, the opening melody and a few other textures, I guess. And they were just separate things that were meant to be put together in whatever way Ben wanted to put them together. That took a lot of time. And then, like, to blow off steam at the end of that session, I was just like, and now I'm just going to hit the dulcimer for a while. I mean, it wasn't random, but I did, like, you know, just kind of like, this is just going to be fun. And I didn't think about it much. And the sound I had in mind was Weeping Wall, was by David Bowie from the Low album, that ding, ding, which is piano going ding, 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 ding. But it's the dulcimer has a piano-ish sound. And I just did a bunch of sonorities. We had worked out the tuning system for the first batch of songs, and we worked out together how we were going to tune the dulcimer, which pitches we liked. We really liked that the flat seventh was a big. Well, it was a 24. Yeah, it's a beautiful sound, and that was a significant one. We had a few others. The dulcimer I couldn't tune it to be completely to have all the pitches, so we had to literally between us decide which ones we liked.
I think we both know there are certain easy entry points for getting into the new intervals, and the harmonic seventh's definitely one of them. I think in 11/8, which is a half flat tritone, is another one.
Yeah.
And then of course there's the correctly tuned major third, but that's not really a part of the quarter tone system. So.
Right. I wonder if the flat and a half does a convincing job of approximating that seventh harmonic, because I think you'd have a lot of people saying that might not work, but I mean, make it your own thing, and it doesn't really matter that much
it's 19 cents flat. It's a lot closer than 31 cents sharp.
Yeah.
Also, with all the multi-tracking of the hammer dulcimer, I think it sort of blurs everything in a way that's kind of forgiving.
Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of assume that. So how are all of these instruments tuned? Because I gather there's a lot of instruments being used, especially for the songs that use tuning systems that don't use 24 notes per octave. Like there's some that use like 10 and 20 and 17. Could you guys talk a little bit about how you prepared instruments in those sorts of tuning systems?
Well, I'll just start by saying we originally were planning only to do quarter tones. And that was because, since Damon hadn't really done microtonal stuff before, it seemed like the obvious easy entry point, and like you wouldn't have to retune every single note. And yeah, it just seemed an accessible way to do it. Plus, I think quarter tones, you can tell me if you agree, I think are sometimes a little underrated. People tend to like skip right by them, because they don't give you like a perfect major third or whatever. And like maybe not all those quarter tones sound super awesome at first blush, but I think it has two huge things, which are, of course, the compatibility with 12. It lets you do a 12 plus sort of thing very easily.
Yeah.
And the fact that all those intermediate quarter tone intervals are as far away from 12 as you can get. So if you want to be Zen, you go there. You can't get any more Zen.
In fact,
There's so much life left to be explored there. There were the compote like Huli and Carrillo, and then there were all the like Vishnegradsky, all the quarter tone guys during the like 20s and 30s when it was like sort of a fad. But then there wasn't really much done with it since then, and I refuse to accept that it's old hat. We originally thinking this was going to be a much smaller thing, like a duo EP, and we weren't planning to have like rock drums and bass so much. But as the project began to grow, I wanted to include more tunings. So I convinced Damon to branch out a little bit, and so I forget if we did 10 or 17 first.
10 first.
10 first, yes. So of course the thing was, I have a ton of microtonal instruments, like microtonal guitars specifically. Most of them are electric, although I was able to rework some of them to be acoustic. So on those, I sort of led the way a little bit more by writing some of the source material, and then Damon had the job of figuring out how he was going to add to that. And I think so. There wasn't dulcimer in the other tunings, but like the Taisha Goto and the Gujang, I believe you retuned those, didn't you?
Yeah, the Gujang became an important one. That's on both of the 10 tunes. We did them Hidden Well and Hurst and Harriman are the 10 tunes, and we did them kind of back to back around the same time. And yeah, it has much fewer strings, so I was just able to tune it pretty easily. And I could have done I don't think I did any. I might have done a couple of lines like on the dulcimer, but I didn't do any foundational work in 10. So I could retune a few notes and get something that would fit as an overdub. But yeah, those two. Ben started one of them, and I started the other. And the Taisha, not the Gujang.
That's right. I think you started Hurst and Harriman with the Gujang parts.
Yep.
Which I thought were very striking.
Is the Gujang a zither-like instrument?
Yeah, it's this guy over here. It's like
oh boy.
It's a big boy.
It's like a koto. I don't think it's in tune anymore, but.
Stan Harryman. That sounds
I
right.
could totally hear it. Yeah.
And you can bend the notes. It's you can do lots of.
So that's where you get the sound like in Hurst and Harriman, where it goes.
That's right.
That one note that's bendy.
Use a pick, and you can also do a blat. Hit the wrong side of the.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was psyched when I heard that sound. I think I called it a Gujang splat. And then we both ended up calling it a splat.
I know, it's exactly what it was. And that was just like really close mic'd, and it's fun. You can do a lot with this thing.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a great instrument. And so you've got that and a dulcimer and various other instruments that can be easily retuned. I guess I'm wondering if you used anything like a fretless guitar instrument as well.
No, not on my end. Ben had one. You started something on it, but we didn't finish that.
Yeah, and we ended up there was enough on the album already. It's 52 minutes. But that's some, we've got a few bits of unfinished material that we might come back to later, or I might use for something. But the other thing, Damon, you could show him is the Taisha Goto, because that was another instrument I wasn't familiar with at all.
That I couldn't really do anything. I had a really crude way of writing lines. This is not an instrument that lends itself to retuning.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
Well, yeah, it only has 5 strings, and they're all just, you play this like a keyboard, so
Can you show it on camera?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's an electric instrument, so you're not gonna really hear it, not plugged in, but it's basically you don't have any control over that. So when I wrote lines that had to be like on the middle section of Bonneville, I had to do a few notes, do part of the phrase, and then retune the whole thing. Do another part of the phrase. So it would vacillate between the two, like offset by 50 cents.
That's really incredible. So is it kind of like a hurdy-gurdy, where it has one string, and then if you retune that one string, then everything is shifted by a quarter tone theoretically?
Right. I mean, it's just it's a lot like a hurdy-gurdy, but instead of the wheel, you can just play it with a pick. And it has a drone string, but I rarely use that. And it has a nice kind of like, when you plug it in, it has a nice kind of Telecaster sort of sound. It has a sharp, it really cuts nicely. It's kind of obnoxious, but
it has a really interesting timbre, I think. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it almost sounds zen just by virtue of the timbre. To me, it's like so clangy, and like there's something dense about it, even with the single notes.
Well, it's I should explain a little bit. It's an octave. This is the low string, and then these 3 are the upper. So they resonate with each other, but you're always playing an octave. And then this is the drone string, which is the same as the lower octave.
That explains why it sounds so big.
Yeah. 4 strings playing the same note in an octave. Yeah.
Very neat. Cool. Do you have any? Were there any significant microtonal scales that you used in the songs that you'd want to talk about that are either conceptually interesting or you think sort of have a distinctive character?
One that came to mind for me was in Dog Day Music. The vocals that open, and then I sort of revisit the theme with some variations in my part. I don't know. It's a scale. It just has I think it's a neutral second that's at the end of the melody. Damon, do you remember that? See with the breeze in this country of heat.
Yeah.
It's and I think we talked some about Georgian vocal music.
Right.
I believe in that they use sort of similar neutral intervals, just sort of intermixed within a generally diatonic context. But that has so much character to me, and when I heard Damon do that, particularly with all the vocal layering, it really reminded me of that stuff, and it sounded very genuine to me. Like, sometimes I like it when stuff sounds like it's part of an actual tradition, even though this is all sort of a psychological effect, as opposed to some sort of like artificially, mathematically constructed scale. Because I could hear, it sounded like that was the music of an alien tribe, their traditional music. You could totally imagine them singing that way. So I thought that was really cool to me. I'm a big fan of neutral intervals in general.
Oh yeah.
And of course, that's something that 17 and 24 have in common, even though they have a different set of notes. They both have, you know, slightly different versions of neutral seconds and thirds, and I think there's really neutral seconds are just so powerful. You can go so many places with them, and they're very distinct from minor and major seconds. And, you know, unlike a lot of other enharmonic intervals, they work really well melodically.
Yeah.
I think they're easier to scan, in my opinion, but I really am a big fan of all of those intervals now, and they're not subtle, you know. It's not like you really have to struggle to hear them.
Right.
Like the difference between a just major third and a 12 Edo major third, which you can hear, but it's not like you're going, oh my god, it's a just tuned major third. My mind is blown. At least never affected me that way.
Unless you're playing very, very still sawtooth waves on purpose.
Right. Well, I listen to sawtooth waves all the time. Nothing better. Damon, how about you? How did you think about integrating those into your melodies?
Well, with the melodies, I mean, intuitively is always my answer. I wasn't thinking about it too much, but with the melodies, I mean, voices aren't that accurate to begin with. So, I mean, you listen to a good take and of anything, and it's like unless it's pitched melodyne corrected or whatever, it's not. There are going to be many pitches that are going to be 20 cents off. So you couldn't really. A lot of it was hard to notice. I tried really hard to, in the 10 and 17, to use reference pitches while I was singing from the recording. And even then, a lot of times it didn't really jump out at me as wildly out of the familiar. So in those cases, it was usually on the quarter tone songs where I could bring it out in a more, well, I guess Hurst and Harriman was one too, but that spot, the neutral second on Dog Day that you were mentioning, was one where it was very conspicuous and it was challenging. It was hard to get that right, but that was the pitch that was going to be, again, it's all very new for me. So that was the one that was going to be, I'm just going to really try to split the difference between expressive singing, which usually involves following familiar scales, and actually trying to sing a quarter tone, which I found that my voice would often, the timbre of my voice would often be much more restricted, and I wouldn't be able to be as expressive when I was really trying to sing a lot of quarter tones. So in those places, doubling helped, making more voices would help.
I know you said your part on Rest, that descending quarter tone line was one you were proud of. I think that's very effective.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that was the first one. Actually, I did that before. I think that was the first one where I tried to sing. And you just told me one way into it is to try to do the little intermittent pitches in a chromatic way, so to speak.
Right. Right.
And I loved the sound, the way that came out melodically. I think they ended up being dividing by 3 instead of in the melody, dividing a whole step by 3. I think that's what it was.
Oh, so it's not actually quarter. It's hard to tell sometimes with those little steps. That's one of the funny things to me is when you're going ultra chromatically, the difference between tunings is not always so obvious.
Right, yeah.
I think I did something also in the beginning of Azimuth where I was also doing third tones, and I only realized it later. It was like a...
Yeah.
Hey, I know that part. It's where you're singing about memory.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing. The context matters so much. I think sometimes people get hung up on I need to adhere to this tuning system at all times. And really, no, you don't. All that matters is what's going on at the moment. And that may only be 3 or 4 notes. So at any given time, So you really have a lot more freedom.
Yeah, it's true. I like thinking about what happens if you don't adhere to the tuning system. Like, what would be the worst thing that would happen to you if you just didn't do it?
Someone at Facebook would get very upset.
Oh yes.
There are people who can hear that stuff, but not very many of them.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um,
You know, it's surprising that quarter tones have been, I don't want to say downplayed, but I mean, I guess lots of microtonal people are interested. Like, I'm interested in dabbling in tuning systems that nobody else has, like, touched yet. And then, like, but quarter tones are so practical for so many reasons. Like, the fact that you can just take a 12 instrument and just, split it off, like, that is such a good reason to use quarter tones that it overrides a lot of other reasons you could have to not use it. And it's also really good for ear training. Like, it's a really good entry point to try and get right in between. I've been trying to, people use the word Zen harmonic in a lot of different ways. This is what I tried to address in my presentation last January. Quarter tones would be the most Zen harmonic thing possible compared to 12 in an out of slot sense, because they're the farthest out of slot, like it's the midpoint. But they
Right.
are the least Zen harmonic in terms of structural drift. Like, if you have a chord progression that sort of warps over its range and, like, ends up at a different point, Michael Brucci is called the Pac-Man moment.
Pac-Man?
Yeah, it's like if you are playing Pac-Man and you, like, go out the left side of the stage and come in the right side, which I think is funny. I like that. That's what I've been trying to describe to a lot of people, and technically it's described by regular temperament theory. That is the thing I think that quarter tones fails at in the Zen harmonic world. But
you are right. However, only if you're stuck inside the box. Because what is that over on the left side of my keyboard? Oh, it's a little wheel. What does that do? It's a pitch bend. So if you just incorporate a little pitch bend, you get your drift. You can get it a lot of different ways. In fact, I don't have my keyboard plugged in, but one of the things I did when I was first experimenting with this was just like playing a little melodic line that's like supposed to go from a low octave to a high octave, but I stop it on like the minor seventh. But the whole time I've been turning up the pitch bend to a whole step. So what that makes is like all the intermediary notes are microtonal by someone could calculate what they are, but they're very notably off sounding, but yet at the end it resolves. And honestly, like that little experience was one of the things that really like blew my mind and made me get way deeper into this.
I think I've literally sung that exact scale in one of my YouTube videos where I ear train one of these scales, because that's actually, in terms of ear training, that's how I like to think of them. If I think of a Zen harmonic scale, there's a way to contract or shrink it such that it will arrive at a different point if you're singing it in sort of a stepwise way. I wonder if anyone, I feel like not a lot of people actually use like the mod wheel in microtonal composition because they want to be precise about it. But it'd be really interesting to think about writing in quarter tones as well as using the mod wheel for extra drift. That might be a really interesting methodology. If you haven't done it already, of course.
No, I mean, I think because this stuff was so acoustic, or if not literally acoustic, aesthetically acoustic, like clean electric, that we didn't really do stuff like, we don't have a whole lot of synthetic sounds. There's some synths here and there, but they aren't really dominant. But I do think that would be an excellent area for someone, possibly me or you, to explore. on Ventifacts, I mean, I just want to say, like, I'm really thrilled with how it came out, and the whole experience was so mind expanding for me, and I think for Damon as well. I think there's not meant. One of the reasons I was so psyched about doing this is because I really wanted to come, and I've talked about this before, but I really wanted to come from the angle of making great songs, like, and emotional music that means something, as opposed to, like, this is a demo of a tuning system using a MIDI instrument. Nothing against that stuff, because it can be very useful for demonstrating things. But
there's just an overabundance of it. There's an overabundance of it.
Yeah, at times. Yeah, so Damon is such a fantastic songwriter, and he's really built a whole aesthetic. We didn't get into lyrics, but his lyrics are, like, really stand alone in their sophistication, in my opinion. So we had all that we could bring to it, and the only thing he was unfamiliar with was the microtones. And I think this is a great example of, like, how if you know how to write great songs, you can integrate this stuff, and it doesn't have to be like some shocking, bizarre, overly intimidating experience. There's just these new colors, and you can bring them in. And for me, like Damon was mentioning, he didn't realize how deep I was in this, but it's like, once I've experienced these colors, like, how can I leave them off my palette?
Yeah, you can.
And
Can't
so
go
I
back.
hope other people who might think it's too hard to get into will realize that it's not, if you're willing to spend the time. And once you get this stuff, it's there, and then you can just use it, and then you can build on it. And so I'm just psyched, because for me, I've I feel like I could spend the rest of my life exploring this.
Oh, absolutely, and many lifetimes. This is a really good album for understanding this, that microtones aren't just one didactic, super electronic thing that can happen, but that they can be experienced on beautiful acoustic instruments, and that they can be used for many different kinds of chord progressions, and it just opens everything up.
Yeah, I want to just add, I was fortunate to have Ben as a guide into the microtones, and it might not have been. You're saying it's easy to jump in. Well, you did just jump in. I had you, I had you in this case, kind of leading me, giving me, encouragement when how am I ever going to sing this, for example, or like, it's doable, but it might be a bit harder to jump in, as an individual, coming from songwriting without somebody that can show you how to so
well,
you just get some tricks to kick the process off. And
right, and I mean, I've certainly benefited from the amazing people in the microtonal community who, I mean, we're so lucky to have these people. We got the OGs, we got newer people, that everyone is so willing to share what they've learned, share their experiences and tips and tricks. So, the more we do this, the more it's going to keep growing, I think.
Absolutely. Question for you guys. What was the biggest challenge that the microtones presented? Like, if there was any part of the album where you were like, okay, the microtones made this the most difficult.
For me, singing was clearly the biggest challenge.
Yes, singing. Sorry.
And it's what I was kind of hinting at before. It's like splitting the difference between expressive singing, which requires following familiar patterns to some extent, and intuition, and working against intuition, which for me, I mean, to some extent, I've been listening to music that's in one way or another microtonal, mostly sort of from the world as opposed to the Zen harmonic world, for a long time, but I haven't actually in my own work been trying to sing it. And it's fascinating to have an instrument tuned that way and see what sounds good, but to try to sing it really requires you to hear it. So for me, that was the single hardest challenge, like hands down, compared to everything else. Everything else was just fun, exploration, and like, wild. And like, I didn't realize, I just wanted to add to, this is kind of an aside, but that I had really different perceptual expectations, as a newbie to this world, coming into it. I was like, okay, this is going to take me down a dark road. It's going to be dark. And I was like, going to do a song called Migraine, and it's going to be like, I don't know if I even mentioned that. I wanted to do.
No, I would love to do a song called Migraine.
I had this whole idea, but it didn't. It opened up a completely different way, and it changed working with them. That what required the listening that was required to actually work with and specifically sing some of these pitches changed the way I listen to. I've been a big fan of Ben Johnston's string quartets for a long time, and it opened up the way I heard them. Like that summer, first got it, like 6 months after starting to do this, I was like, oh, this is just completely different, like from the way I heard these, 2 years ago or whatever. But anyway, I'm rambling. That's.
Are there any scales that you found more intuitive to sing? Microtonal scales.
24 was harder because of those middle, just stuck in the middle thing. Harder than 17 and 10, and that's all I sang. I didn't. The 20 was more of a featured, like a little it's icing on the cake, I think. But those are the only ones that I tried to sing. I found 10 really, sort of comfortable and kind of giddy, kind of heady.
Yeah, I think that comes through on Hurst and Harriman. It has I liked your description of this as a weirdly joyous album, and I think that applies to that song. And as you were saying, and also, your some of your experience listening to Spidermilk, which is a kind of dark, creepy album, maybe led to those expectations. That was certainly the first time I ever heard quarter tones. My experience of them was sounding like demented circus music.
Mm-hmm.
So just finding that there's more than just that initial impression in alternate tunings is really fun. And I think 10 is just wonderful, wonderful tuning. I mean, the low number of notes, yet the complexity of the sound in it is something pretty special. And that's another one that not a whole lot has been done in. Elaine Walker, of course, you played with her, Stephen, but she did a lot of cool songs in 10 that are really, really accessible and great sounding. And there, of course, there's something about the 10 fingers and 10 notes that it just seems meant to be played with.
So what you're saying is we need to write a pop song where every chord uses all 10 notes, and each one is in a different finger.
That's not what I was thinking of, but I think that's a great idea.
10's, it doesn't surprise me to hear you guys say this about 10. And I think maybe part of that has to do with just the sheer, joy and wonder of, 5/10. Just as, this delightfully small scale that can do a lot. I think it really lends itself well to joy and sort of more middle tempo, up tempo music. I don't know what it is. And Adam Neely has even commented on that when he was on his live stream working on 10 tone equal temperament one time.
I had no idea he had played with that. That's really cool.
There was one time where he was live streaming it and he was playing around with it. And he used just the 2 shifts of 5/10 as his musical material.
And I don't know if I've talked about that with Damon, even though it seems really obvious that 10 is made of 2 5s, but just where you find 5 Edo, you find it in a lot of world music, don't you? Is the equal pentatonic scale. I mean, when people talk about pentatonics, they think about simplistic guitar solos. But the equal pentatonic scale is really 5 equal notes across the octave. You might know more details about where that's found in traditional music, Stephen. Do you?
Oh, me. I thought you were talking to Damon. I think, 5/10 is definitely found in some African music. And then there's some gamelan music that can sound similar to 5/10, but might not be exactly 5/10. The Slendro scale is close, but slightly unequal. And the Pelog scale is unequal as well, but not close to 5/10. So I think, mainly African music is sort of where you'd find the equal pentatonic scale traditionally, as far as I know.
Yeah, I feel like the existence of that is a bit of a counter argument to the theory that all everyone's ever been trying to do with notes is approximate simple integer ratios, right?
Oh yeah,
because that 240 cent step is not anything low on the harmonic series.
Oh no, if you study anything in world music, you'll kind of realize that people aren't just wanting to approximate JI all the time. Although it is definitely something that does happen. And since it's so intimately connected to string lengths, it's a natural marriage of ideas. But yeah, it just depends on what your methodology is. So, tons of scales that are nowhere near them.
Yep. And so much to explore.
I wonder what the most unregular world scale is. When I look at scales from world music, I see that they have to have regular patterns and they have to decently saturate the octave. For example, I don't think there's any such thing as a traditional scale that has like 12 notes in the octave and then like 5 of them are like quarter tones clustered around a note and then like a bunch of other clusters and then like another cluster at the end. It's all like it's spread throughout, even if not equidistantly, just kind of unequally. If you want to make your own scales, having some built-in regularity is super helpful. So MOS scales are a really, really neat concept.
I think now could be, if you don't have to run, this could be a great time to just like give a little overview of moment of symmetry concept, if you feel like it, Stephen.
Yeah, I might not be very good at it. Sometimes the anti-diatonic scale has been used. There's 2 places I know of that have that, although maybe there could be more. First, we could talk about the diatonic scale. The diatonic scale in 12-tone equal temperament is conceived of as kind of a regular thing, and you have 5 large steps, which are like the whole steps, and then 2 small steps, which are the half steps. But the reason I'm calling them large and small is because you could have a large size and a small size that's not necessarily like a whole and a half size. You know, just one is smaller than the other.
So you could have, say, the small step be a quarter tone and the large step be a whole step plus a quarter tone. And
Yeah.
that would, just as a simple example, that would give you a scale with a similar pattern, but a somewhat different sound.
Yes, that would be very different sounding. Yeah, there's lots of those kinds of scales. So then, in MOS theory, anytime you have an assortment of large and small steps, you can organize it in a way where everything is spread out from each other as far as it can be, which means that you don't need to refer to the actual string of L's and S's in the pattern if you're using MOS theory. This is a super great shortcut for referring to scales, although it does exclude many scales that are just slightly irregular. Those can often be described as mod mosses.
So an example of a scale like that would be the harmonic minor. That's like the classic example because that has a minor third step in it that is sort of the black sheep of the scale. And
Yeah.
So that
Well, the
you have
augmented
to add another
second.
letter. Right. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm terrible about that stuff.
Oh, me too. But yeah, that's a great example. There are sometimes mod mosses that generate 3 kinds of step sizes, such as that one, and then some of them just contain L's and S's, or large steps and small steps. But those large and small steps are just not distributed so that everything is spread apart as evenly as it can be. Let's take an example from Hurst and Harriman. Elaine Walker in her 10-tone work has used the Dicot 7 scale, which it took me a really, really long time to figure out that scale was called Dicot, and I know we were talking about it the other day, because sometimes if a scale is too little and crude, there's not a good regular temperament name for it, because the people who want to approximate JI just don't care about it,
Right.
even though it might have a super interesting underexplored pattern in it. A Dicot 7 scale has 3 large steps and 4 small steps, which means that in 10-tone equal temperament, the large step could be 2/10 of an octave, and the small step could be 1/10 of an octave. So let's think about adding all that up. So 3 times 2/10 of an octave there, that would give you 6. And then we want to get all of the pitches in the octaves, so then 4 times 1/10 of an octave, well, that gives us, 6 plus 4 there would be 10. So in Hurst and Harriman, there's the usage of 5-tone equal temperament, but you could spell it C, D, F, G, A, And then there are two more incidental notes in between D and F and A and C. And you could call those E down and B down. So that scale is actually a mod moss of dicot. Because, let's think about it, C to D is a large step, and then that little D, E down F cluster would be two S's in a row, and then F, G, A is two L's in a row, and then two more S's.
Let's back up for a second and just define what a mod moss is.
Yes.
It's basically just an MOS scale, and an MOS scale is just anything you can define as some combination of small and large steps. And a mod moss is a version of that, but with some kind of tweak or multiple tweaks, right?
Yes, exactly. And I am I am not smart enough to know what the tweaks are. I forgot. But yeah, there's ways to tweak them that are very specific. But another interesting MOS scale or MOS scale, other than 5L2S, the regular diatonic scale, is 2L5S. So imagine that you have two steps in the scale, but those two steps are larger than the five other steps. That scale has been found in Africa, and it is also generally, I think, taken to be the Pelog scale in gamelan music, but the sizes can vary wildly, and sometimes you might have an irregularity that would make that not quite line up, but that's what a lot of the data says, like the data that William Sitharis got from visiting Indonesia. So yeah, these regular patterns are definitely in places.
Yeah, so I think this stuff is fascinating to explore because it drills down a little deeper into the DNA of what's really going on with the construction of a scale. And I think the most valuable thing about the MOS theory to me is just sort of, it lets you generalize something familiar like the diatonic scale, but then see how it could apply to any tuning, as long as it fits properly into the set of notes you have. We worry so much sometimes about the difference of like 5 cents or 10 cents, but the larger pattern is also extremely dominant in how things sound. Like any approximation of the diatonic scale across 10 different tunings, you're going to be able to hear that that's what it is.
Yeah, that's a really, really neat observation. I think I know a lot of people who went through music school, and basically the entire time they were trying to get out of doing theory, which is not how I do things, but like I get it. So to them, this stuff must seem like headache times a million. But it's not that bad.
Right. Well, I feel like it's sort of different mindsets. Like sometimes I want to really dig into that, and I always want to see like, what can I find from swimming in this swamp here? Because there's so much in it, and you can easily get lost. But I can find, I like how this sounds. I like how this sounds. So I'm going to sort of like collect these and bring them back to my lair. And then when I'm in like intuitive compositional mode, I'm like, hey, how would I try this? How would I try this? Yeah. And I know you do that a lot. Sort of having like a very high concept for a song. And Iglesias Jones, Jason Yerger, he does that a lot too. So
yeah,
no scale should be left on the cutting room floor if you're willing to do the work to turn it into something. Thank you so much for having us on, and I hope everyone will check out the Ventifacts album, ventifacts.bandcamp.com. It's also on Spotify right now. Of course, we'd appreciate it if you purchased it on Bandcamp so we actually get anything from it.
Yes, buy it on Bandcamp.
But also, I want to mention we also have the physical versions in now, and they're very carefully homemade, and every copy is individual. So for people who still like having material reality in their hands, it's highly recommended by us.
That is very cool. I hate reality, but I think my listeners like it. So, okay, great. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
All right. I'll see you all later.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Now and Zen. Please listen to Ventifacts, the album by, Ventifacts. The song you're hearing in the background is the ballad of Hearst and Harriman from the album. If you want to help us out, please leave our podcast a review on iTunes and spread the word. We release new episodes every once in a while. Thanks once again to Damon and Ben for joining us on this excellent episode. As always, I'll remind you that we have a Patreon account, and that when we hit the 60 patron mark, I will make Now and Zen episodes on a schedule instead of sporadically. This episode has been made possible by the generous support of our patrons, our Zen Harmonic patrons, as well as our Zen Harmonic gods, Mike Battaglia, Sheldon Bird, Barry Lemon, Adam Freese, Matthew Sheeran, Vincenzo Cigarella, Hector McGuffin, Christopher Bailey, Leland O. Weigel, Joe Weigel, and Tina Harmon Carteau. Thank you so much for listening. We really, really appreciate it. Also, I've been trying to release microtonal covers of songs that are on the albums I interview people about, if it's applicable. So, as you're hearing the Ballad of Hurst and Harriman in the background, I'll let you know that there's now a cover on my YouTube channel of this song where I dress up as Hurst and Harriman from the picture. So it was a very fun cover to make over fall break. See you all next time on Now and Zen.
We don't wait for fear to crush and freelance implement. We painstakingly gathered, they're not heaven sent. We don't wake in dread to the reporting of shots. We wake to read a table spread with words of thought. Double down. Double down.
And Hurst says,
Looking down is easy. It's looking across that makes me dizzy. Like I'm on sauce. Oh, but I am awake. I am awake. And wakefulness is hard. It is a luxury you can't know if you never leave the brickyard.
and Harriman says,
Wakefulness is a snowdrift. On the horns of the moon. Anyone can look up, but you have